The notice went up on the courthouse bulletin board sometime before noon, pinned between a tax sale posting and a flyer for a church supper. And by 1 o'clock, the whole county had reduced Elias Mercer's trouble to a number small enough to repeat with a smile. $22. Not drought, not bad yield, not a note he had ignored for months. $22 in an escrow adjustment Mercer Hollow Bank claimed had gone unpaid long enough to justify legal action against a farm that had been in his family since before the creek road was paved. By the time Elias stepped into the branch, 2 men from the feed store were already there, caps in their hands, pretending not to notice. The loan officer stood behind the counter in a pressed shirt and a winter tie, speaking in that soft professional tone people use when they want to sound kind in public. "It's already been referred out, Mr. Mercer." Elias looked at the paper, not the man. "For $22? The officer gave a small shrug. "It isn't just the amount now." A woman at the new accounts desk stopped typing. Someone near the door shifted his boots against the tile. Humiliation in a small town was rarely loud. It lived in pauses, in lowered eyes, in the courtesy people used when they had already decided your business was finished. Elias did not argue. He did not lean in. He only asked for copies, the statement, the late notice, the legal referral, and the envelope. That last part made the officer hesitate. When Claire got home that evening, the yard lights were already on, throwing pale combs across the gravel beside the barn. The old grain auger sat black against the fence line, and smoke from the stovepipe drifted flat in the cold. Inside, the kettle had long since gone quiet. Her father was at the kitchen table in his work coat, the foreclosure packet squared into neat edges as if order itself might reveal something carelessness had missed. Every date had been circled in pencil. Every fee had been underlined once. Beside the bank papers sat a second pile, folded tax receipts, a hand-drawn parcel map, a narrow black notebook with years of fuel entries in Elias's block handwriting, and the old metal deed box he had not opened since her mother died. Claire set down her bag. "What happened at the branch?" Elias slid the envelope toward her. She turned it over. Postmark, meter stamp, routing marks. "That's what you're looking at?" He nodded. "They were too certain," he said. He reached for the parcel map, his thumb rough with cracked skin and grease, and tapped a narrow strip near the creek boundary. "The land in their papers," he said, "hasn't sat right in a long time." Then he closed the notebook, and in the silence that followed, the $22 stopped sounding small. Claire began the next morning where people in counties like Mercer's still went when a story on paper did not sound true. The recorder's office sat beneath the courthouse, down a short flight of worn concrete steps with a metal handrail polished smooth by decades of palms and winter gloves. The basement smelled like dust, damp wool, toner, and the faint sourness of old folders that had passed through too many hands. A space heater clicked in one corner. Filing cabinets lined the walls in dented rows. Behind the counter, a clerk with half-moon glasses looked up once, recognized the family name, and said nothing about the notice on the bulletin board. Claire signed the request slip and started pulling books. Mortgage releases, easements, survey corrections, assignment records. Thin packets with staples gone brown at the edges. She worked slowly, turning each page flat with the side of her hand, following the farm backward through years when people still described land by fence lines, sycamores, and creek bends. Most of it was ordinary. Notes paid, lines redrawn, acreage adjusted after an old survey dispute, the kind of paperwork banks summarized in neat computer screens and families remembered in drawers. But summaries were not records. By noon she had moved to the public library, where the local archive room stayed a few degrees colder than the rest of the building. The microfilm machine sat in the corner under a buzzing fluorescent light. She fed in coins and watched the reels turn. Old notices slid past in trembling black and white. Tax sales, seed ads, grain prices, incorporations, estate transfers, until she found the reference her father had written in the margin of his notebook in careful block letters. U.S. Treasury Filing, 1976. It was easy to miss. One page, blue stamp, formal header. A recorded notice tied to a federal farm credit stabilization program that had passed through the county during the hard years. It carried the signature of a bank president long buried and a Treasury regional officer no one in town would remember now. Claire read it once, then again, then a third time with a yellow legal pad pulled close. The language was dry, but not harmless. It referenced the original operating note on Mercer acreage. It described a collateral assignment, and in 3 tight paragraphs, it laid out conditions that seemed to matter now more than they had in 1976. If default ever triggered enforcement, certain notices had to issue in sequence, certain authority had to be recorded, and title movement could not simply be treated like an ordinary private foreclosure file. Claire circled one sentence, then another. The bank could service the debt, it could collect, but not any way it pleased. When she carried the certified copy home that evening, Elias was at the kitchen table again, coffee gone cold beside his notebook, the foreclosure packets still aligned with a care that no longer looked nervous. It looked deliberate. Claire laid the Treasury filing next to the complaint. He did not smile. He removed his glasses, wiped them on the edge of his shirt, and held the page closer to the light. "Let me see the stamp." She pointed to the bottom margin. He studied it longer than the text. Then Claire saw something else. The tract numbers in the 1976 filing did not sit cleanly against the parcel description in the bank's modern complaint. One creek field had been swept in that should not have been there. An older subdivision line, clearly marked in the archived record, had disappeared entirely. She looked up. They filed on the wrong ground. Elias set the paper down carefully. "Maybe," he said. Then, after a moment, quieter still, "or they filed like nobody would ever pull the old record." The kitchen changed by inches. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic overnight transformation. It happened the way serious things usually happened in farmhouses, through accumulation. A cleared corner. A second lamp pulled closer to the table. Coffee cups replaced by file folders. The old oilcloth surface, once crowded with salt shakers and seed catalogs, disappeared beneath deeds, receipts, envelopes, county copies, and Claire's yellow legal pads covered in neat, slanting notes. She brought home banker's boxes from town and labeled them in black marker. Mailing records, tax history, parcel maps, loan file, survey corrections. Elias opened the metal deed box and began setting its contents out with the calm of a man laying out tools he had used before. Tax duplicates folded along old creases, crop insurance renewals, canceled checks held together by a brittle rubber band, hand-drawn survey sketches with creek bends marked in pencil, notes in his late wife's handwriting tucked between utility bills and grain settlement sheets. He did not need to read the tabs. He knew where everything belonged. He reached for each paper as if memory had weight. Claire built the timeline first. Statement mailed. Fee added. Cure period shortened. Legal referral. Posting. Then she began laying one version of the story against another. The envelope postmark against the date on the notice. The foreclosure complaint against the certified assignment history. The 1976 Treasury filing against the parcel description the bank claimed was clean. That was when the neatness of the bank's paperwork started to come apart. There was a gap. On paper, Mercer Hollow Bank claimed uninterrupted authority over the note, but the county record showed the older collateral transfer tied to the federal filing, and nowhere in the local chain was there a clear unwinding of it. Not cleanly, not in sequence. And the acceleration letter had added legal fees before the cure period was fully spent. Worse than that, the foreclosure description swept in the creek field, a strip that had been corrected out years earlier under a later survey. Claire read that page twice, then a third time. "They overreached," she said. Elias, seated under the low kitchen light in his work shirt and worn jacket, said nothing at first. He only kept turning pages, one finger resting near the margin like he was feeling for something beneath the words. Then Claire found her mother's note. It was tucked inside a tax envelope, written in fading blue ballpoint on the back of a seed invoice. "Never trust what they summarize. Pull the filing itself." For a moment, the room went still, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the kettle beginning to stir on the stove. Elias took the note, read it once, and stared at it longer than Claire expected. His face did not change, but something in the room did. Grief, maybe, or recognition. Then he reached for a folder he had kept off to one side all evening. "I wasn't going to open this yet," he said. Inside were older correspondence copies, handwritten balance disputes, and one thin sheet that made Claire understand the bank's speed was not confidence. It was exposure. By midnight, the table held more than suspicion. It held a pattern, a record, enough for a lawyer to see what the bank had counted on no one seeing at all. The sale was set for a Tuesday morning, posted in the thin, formal language banks liked to use when they wanted violence to look administrative. On the courthouse steps, the cold had a way of sharpening every sound. Soles on concrete. A truck door closing across the square. The soft rattle of papers inside a leather folder. Breath hanging pale in the air, then disappearing. Most people broke before a morning like that. Elias spent the first hour repairing a fence line along the north pasture where the ground stayed hard in winter. He worked in the same worn canvas jacket he used for feed runs, wire pliers in one pocket, folded receipts in the other. He didn't leave until Claire's call came through, thin and steady over the truck speaker. "It's in," she said. That was all. He went inside, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, changed into a clean work shirt, and took the black notebook from the table. Inside were copies he had handled so often the edges had gone soft. Survey marks, treasury references, parcel descriptions that should have matched and didn't. Dates that looked harmless until they were placed beside each other. Claire's motion asked for no sympathy. It asked for sequence. Defective acceleration. Questionable standing. A parcel description that drifted just enough to matter. And beneath all of it, the older thing. The 1976 Treasury recorded collateral condition no one at the bank had treated like it still belonged in the room. At the courthouse, the substitute trustee accepted the filing packet with the expression of a man expecting routine and finding weight instead. He stepped away from the steps, away from the few people gathered there in coats and gloves, and made a call he had not planned to make. He listened longer than he wanted to. When he came back, he did not clear his throat the way men do before finishing unpleasant business. "The sale is continued." Not canceled. Continued. In a small county, that word traveled differently. Canceled meant failure. Continued meant something had been found. Claire looked at Elias as if waiting for the first crack in him. Relief, anger, vindication, anything visible. He only took the notice, folded it once, and placed it inside the notebook. A man who'd worked land his whole life knew better than to mistake weather for harvest. By Thursday, the bank's tone had changed. A representative drove out under the excuse of discussing options and spent too long looking at the deed box on Elias's table. Another office asked for copies of records they should have known existed if their file had ever been read properly. Then a junior lawyer left Claire a voicemail, careful and dry, asking whether her client might consider a practical resolution. The title memo arrived before dusk. Claire read it twice, then once aloud. If the Treasury-linked transfer had never been properly cleared, every affidavit in the foreclosure chain may have said more than the bank had authority to say. That evening, the kettle started to hiss on the stove. Elias sat at the kitchen table, one hand resting on the closed notebook, while outside, the pasture fences held against the dark. Somewhere in town, people at the bank were no longer pushing forward. They were checking what, exactly, had started moving beneath them. Once a bank starts calling instead of sending letters with barcodes in the corner, the air changes. The first offer came on a gray Thursday just after 8, while frost still clung to the feed buckets by the barn, and a half-finished cup of coffee sat cooling beside Elias's black notebook. Mercer Hollow said it was willing to reinstate the loan. No new money, no immediate cure, just a path back, offered in the careful language institutions use when they want retreat to sound generous. Claire listened, legal pad open, pencil still. When the call ended, she read the proposal across the kitchen table. Elias looked past her shoulder at the line items, at the missing attachments, at the clean wording where admissions should have been. "They move that fast?" she asked. He folded the page once. "Only when they've seen something." The second offer arrived before the first had time to cool. Fees waived, penalties removed. Then a restructuring proposal at a preferred rate no one in Mercer Hollow would have offered a man they still believed cornered. Their lawyer called it cooperation. The county seat litigator Claire had brought in called it movement. He said it the way a surveyor names a boundary marker, quietly, because he knows exactly what it means. Real movement started when they stopped answering substance with substance. Claire asked for accounting histories, mailing logs, authority records, the original notices with transmission data still attached. Mercer Hollow sent summaries, clean tables, internal printouts, no source documents. She asked again. The next call included a different lawyer, younger voice, softer tone. By Monday, a regional counsel joined. You could hear the shift even before anyone said a word. Less confidence, more caution. Long. The final hearing happened under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little tired and a little older than they were. The courtroom was too warm for February. Coats draped over chairbacks, styrofoam coffee cups softening on the clerk's counter, a vent ticking somewhere overhead. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. By then, the danger to Mercer Hollow was sitting in neat stacks on counsel table, clipped and tabbed and copied 3 times over. Elias sat in a clean work shirt and his brown jacket, the one with the frayed cuff at the wrist. In front of him was the black notebook that had followed him from the kitchen table to the county archive to the courthouse steps. He kept one hand resting on it while the bank's lawyer spoke about harmless error, administrative complexity, equitable discretion. The phrases came out smooth, practiced, almost soothing, as if a foreclosure could be explained away by calling it complicated. The judge did not seem interested in smooth. He asked for the exhibits again. That was the shape of the morning. Not speeches. Sequence. Claire's lawyer stood only when he had to. He did not dramatize the file. He walked the court through it the way a man walks fence posts after a storm, one gap at a time. Who owned the note? When they owned it? What authority was recorded? What notice was sent? What charges appeared before they could lawfully appear? Why acreage outside a clean chain had found its way into a foreclosure complaint over a $22 deficiency that should never have been allowed to grow claws in the first place. He did not hurry the Treasury filing. He let it arrive in the room at the right time. Certified copy, date stamp, collateral program notation from 1976. A requirement for a recorded chain of authority that Mercer Hollow's modern file still could not show without gaps. Then the assignment path, incomplete. Then the fee load, premature. Then the parcel descriptions, drifting from page to page just far enough to matter. Then the continuance logs. Then the mailing records that described certainty where the originals described confusion. Nothing alone looked cinematic. Together, it looked fatal. The bank's counsel asked for latitude, said the underlying debt was real, said the defects were clerical, procedural, curable. The judge listened without interrupting, glasses low on his nose, yellow legal pad filling one line at a time. When he finally spoke, it was with the flat precision that frightened institutions more than anger ever could. He stayed the foreclosure. He found the acceleration defective. He ordered the fees unwound, the record corrected, and the parties into mediation under court supervision on the actual loan dispute. If Mercer Hollow failed to cure the defects fully, Claire's wrongful foreclosure and title claims would remain alive. That was all. No gasp.
No collapse. Just the clerk marking the order, papers shifting, chairs moving back across worn tile. The kind of ending that only mattered if you understood what the bank had come there expecting. Outside, wind pushed dust in thin lines across the parking lot. The courthouse flag snapped once, then settled. Claire stood beside Elias near his truck, the order in her gloved hand. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Across the lot, the bank's people spoke in low voices near a sedan with dark windows. No one looked at them directly. By sunset, the final offer came through. Debt reduction, damages, attorney fees, title correction, and confidentiality, placed near the end like something slipped under a door after dark. Claire read the last page twice before calling him. He was in the machine shed, tightening a chain binder by the grain drill, metal clicking in the cold. "They'll fix the title," she said. "They'll pay. They want silence." A pause. Then, "No." She waited. "The county record stays clean," he said. "And it stays true." Before dawn the next morning, the farm looked exactly as it had the week before. Frost on the fence wire, the pump handle silver with cold, a pale band of light gathering behind the east field. Elias poured coffee into 2 thick mugs while Claire opened the metal deed box on the kitchen table. She placed the judge's order inside beside her mother's note, the faded surveys, and the 1976 filing that had waited all those years for someone to read it carefully enough. Then she closed the lid. Outside, the fields did not announce anything. They did not need to. Nothing about the land had changed to the eye, only on paper. And this time, the paper would hold. Sometimes victory doesn't arrive with noise. Not outside a courthouse, not in a headline. Sometimes victory is simply this: the lie no longer holds once it reaches the record. That morning, Elias didn't celebrate.
He put the kettle on, poured coffee into an old steel mug, and placed the deed box back on the shelf. Inside were the same papers as before: his mother's note, the 1976 filing, the judge's order. But their weight had changed. Before, they were protection. Now, they were proof. Mercer Hollow had believed the land was just numbers: acreage, fees, deficiency, file reference. What they failed to understand was that old land remembers everything, and sometimes all it takes is one quiet man willing to read what everyone else rushed past. The fields looked the same in the morning light. That was the dignity of it. Nothing had been made dramatic, nothing had been made loud. The truth had simply been put back where it belonged. And in stories like this, that is the deepest kind of justice.